Bad mommy. Clara is in the basement. The parrot's sharp, repetitive cry, echoing from the depths of the silent mansion, tore through Carlos's heart like an icy blade. He froze, the whiskey glass slipping from his trembling hands, shattering on the polished marble. His eyes swept the room, searching for his wife, Sophia, but she wasn't there. His mind, previously calm, now seethed with the image of his little daughter, Clara, whom he believed to be safe in a distant boarding school, and whom Sophia swore she was visiting. An icy shiver ran down his spine when the parrot repeated, this time with an almost human urgency, "In the basement, trapped." Carlos felt the ground give way beneath him, and a terrible suspicion took hold. What if everything Sophia had said about their daughter was a lie, and what he was about to discover would change his life forever? Carlos remained motionless, the sound of shattered glass echoing in his mind, yet muffled by the turmoil erupting in his chest. In the basement, trapped! The parrot's voice, whom he affectionately called Pipo, pierced his soul. Pipo was a gift from Clara, a vibrant link to the daughter he missed so dearly. That bird, with its emerald green feathers and intelligent eyes, had always been a source of joy, repeating silly phrases and mimicking household sounds. But now, its words carried an unbearable weight. Carlos closed his eyes, trying to push away the image of Clara, so small and fragile, locked away somewhere dark and cold. It was absurd. Sophia would never do such a thing. She was the epitome of elegance, of charity, the woman he loved and trusted blindly. It was she who had convinced him of the necessity of the European boarding school, explaining with a soft, convincing voice that Clara needed specialized care, an environment that he, with his frantic schedule, couldn't provide. "It's for her own good, my love," she always said, and he believed her with all his broken heart. But the seed of doubt, planted by Pipo's insistent whispers, began to germinate. Carlos felt a cold sweat trickle down his forehead. He knelt, not to collect the shards of glass, but as if his legs had given way under the weight of that unthinkable revelation. His fingers trembled as they touched the cold marble. He looked at Pipo, who now watched him from his perch in the living room, head tilted, as if awaiting a reaction. The bird's eyes seemed deeper, wiser than ever. "Bad mommy. Clara is in the basement," Pipo repeated with an intonation that seemed almost a warning. Carlos slowly rose, the pain in his chest transforming into a cold urgency. He needed answers. He couldn't simply ignore this. His intuition, that silent voice he had learned to trust in business, now screamed within him. He thought of Sophia's phone calls, always short, always with the excuse of connection problems when he asked to speak with Clara. He thought of the photos she sent, always from a distance, always with Clara's back turned or blurred. Small details that, at the time, he had dismissed as mere inconveniences. Now, each of them fit into a macabre puzzle. The mansion, once a sanctuary of luxury and peace, now seemed a labyrinth of secrets. Every shadow danced with the possibility of a hidden truth. Carlos took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He couldn't confront Sophia yet, not without proof. He needed to be cautious, cunning. The idea that his wife, the woman who shared his bed and his life, could be capable of such cruelty was a devastating blow. His mind struggled to reconcile the image of the loving and devoted Sophia with the bad mommy Pipo denounced. The fear of being mistaken, of betraying Sophia's trust, was almost as great as the fear that the parrot was right. But his love for Clara, the memory of her sweet smile and tight hugs, was a fire that burned stronger than any doubt. He would do whatever it took to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. His eyes, previously clouded with confusion, now gleamed with a grim determination. He turned to Pipo, a silent plea in his gaze. The bird blinked, as if understanding, and let out a small chirp. Carlos knew he wasn't alone. Pipo's presence, a link to Clara, was an unexpected and much-needed comfort. Carlos knelt again, this time to collect the glass shards. But his mind was far from the task. Each splinter seemed a piece of his perfect life, now shattered. He felt the sharp edge of a fragment cut his finger, but the physical pain was minuscule compared to the anguish consuming him. Pipo watched, silent for a moment, before letting out a soft, "Clara? Basement?" It was no longer a cry, but a whisper, almost a lament. "Pipo, my friend," Carlos murmured, looking at the bird with tear-filled eyes. "You need to help me. Where is this basement? The mansion is enormous." The idea of a secret basement seemed absurd in such a modern and transparent house, but the premise that Sophia could hide Clara was even more surreal. He stood up, wiping the blood from his finger with a handkerchief, and began to pace the room, his mind racing for a plan. Sophia usually spent her mornings in the mansion's gym or tending to her exotic plants in the winter garden. He needed time, privacy. He decided to begin his search in the less obvious areas, those Sophia controlled more strictly. The main basement, used for wines and storage, was accessible to all staff. But Pipo had said, "in the basement," with an emphasis that suggested something more specific, more hidden. Carlos remembered a dark wooden door, almost camouflaged in the library wall, which Sophia always kept locked, claiming it was an old document storage that didn't need to be disturbed. He had never questioned it. Now that door became a sinister beacon in his mind. With each step, Carlos's heart beat faster. The mansion, once a symbol of his success, now seemed a prison, a stage for a cruel drama. He approached the library, feeling the air grow heavier. Pipo, as if reading his thoughts, flew from his perch and landed on Carlos's shoulder, his small claws gently gripping. "Bad mommy, Clara is in the basement," he repeated, this time with chilling clarity, and then, to Carlos's surprise, lightly pecked his ear and flew towards the library, landing on top of the dark doorframe. A shiver ran through Carlos. Pipo was pointing the way. That bird, Clara's gift to him, was the only witness, the only guide. He approached the door, feeling the cold wood under his fingers. It was locked, as always. Carlos tried the doorknob, but it was firm. His breath caught in his throat. He stepped back a little, examining the surrounding wall. There was no visible lock, just a smooth panel. It was a secret door, masterfully disguised. Sophia's cunning, which he so admired in business, now revealed itself as a tool of deception and cruelty. The image of Clara, alone and frightened, forced a tear to stream down Carlos's face. He felt an overwhelming wave of guilt for not having realized sooner, for having trusted blindly, but there was no time for regrets now. There was only the urgent need to act. He needed tools, a plan to open that door without alerting Sophia. His eyes met Pipo's, who watched him with unusual intensity. "Come on, Pipo," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Let's bring Clara home." The determination in his gaze had hardened, transforming into an unwavering promise. He wouldn't rest until he found his daughter. Carlos stepped away from the camouflaged door, his heart pounding in his chest. The promise he had made to himself echoed in his mind, but the reality of that impenetrable barrier confronted him. Pipo, still perched on the frame, seemed to share his frustration, shaking his head from side to side. "Bad mommy, basement," he chirped softly, almost as an encouragement. Carlos took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts. The mansion was vast, but he knew it like the back of his hand, or so he thought. How had Sophia managed to hide something so significant for so long? The answer was simple and painful. He had been blinded by love and trust. He needed something to open the door. A key, unlikely given the absence of a lock, perhaps a hidden mechanism, a lever, a disguised button. Carlos began to examine the wall with his fingers, sliding them over the smooth wood, searching for any irregularity, any crack. The wood was perfectly fitted with no visible seams. It was a work of art in dissimulation, a testament to Sophia's cunning. With every inch explored, anger and disbelief grew within him. How could Sophia, the woman he had placed on a pedestal, be so calculating and cruel? The image of her smile, once so captivating, now distorted in his mind, revealing a coldness he had never perceived. Pipo flew back to Carlos's shoulder, his small claws gripping more tightly. He pecked Carlos's neck, drawing his attention to a specific spot on the wall, slightly above Carlos's eye level, where a small, decorative carving subtly stood out from the rest. It was a wooden ornament, shaped like a leaf, which Carlos had always thought was just part of the decoration. He touched it. It was solid, but there was a slight, almost imperceptible give. With his fingertip, Carlos pressed. Nothing. He tried to twist it. Nothing. Frustration began to settle in, like a dense fog. But the image of Clara, trapped and alone, prevented him from giving up. He looked at Pipo, who watched him with an intensity that seemed to say, "Harder, try again." Carlos then, with more force, pushed the carving and, to his surprise, heard a soft, almost inaudible click. The door, previously motionless, receded about a centimeter, revealing a dark crack and a musty smell of mold and dust. Carlos's heart leaped. It was real. Everything was real. Guilt hit him with the force of a tsunami. His poor Clara, so close, and he so oblivious. Tears blurred his vision, but he blinked them away quickly. There was no time for self-pity. That smell of abandonment, of darkness, was a punch to the gut. He pushed the door harder, and it opened slowly, creaking in protest, revealing a narrow, dark staircase that descended into the depths of the mansion. The air down there was heavy and cold, laden with a palpable sadness, almost a silent lament. Pipo, who had flown into the crack as soon as it opened, now waited on the first step, looking at Carlos with his bright eyes. "Clara, basement," he whispered, his voice soft but full of meaning, a thread of hope in the darkness. Carlos turned on his phone's flashlight, and the beam of light danced through the darkness, revealing damp stone steps and concrete walls. Cobwebs hung like macabre veils, and the silence was broken only by the sound of his own ragged breath and Pipo's occasional chirp. Every shadow seemed to hide an even darker secret. He hesitated for an instant, the fear of the unknown and the truth that awaited him paralyzing him. His heart pounded erratically, an alarm drum in his chest, but his love for Clara was an inextinguishable beacon, a force that propelled him forward. Each step downward was a step towards the unknown, but also a step towards his daughter. An act of redemption. He descended one step at a time, his hand firmly gripping the icy handrail, Pipo ahead of him, guiding him with unexpected courage. With each step, the atmosphere grew denser, colder, and the darkness seemed to close in around them. The phone's light barely managed to penetrate the gloom that seemed to swallow everything. Carlos felt the weight of Sophia's betrayal, his wife's cruelty crush him, but he wouldn't stop. Not now. He was on his way to Clara, and nothing would stop him. Carlos descended another step, the dense, cold air embracing him like a shroud. The smell of mold and abandonment intensified, mixing with a metallic, damp odor that made his stomach churn. The faint light of the phone struggled to pierce the abyssal darkness, revealing only glimpses of rough stone walls, seeping with moisture. Each step echoed in the oppressive silence, a sound amplified by the anxiety that gnawed at Carlos. Pipo, on the step ahead, turned his head, his bright eyes fixed on Carlos as if encouraging him to continue. "Clara, basement," whispered the bird, its voice small, but full of an urgency that propelled Carlos forward. Carlos's heart beat against his ribs like a caged bird. Guilt crushed him. How could he have been so blind, so naive? The image of Sophia, with her elegant smile and sweet words, now seemed a grotesque mask, hiding unimaginable cruelty. He thought of Clara, his small, vibrant daughter, trapped in that dark place, perhaps for months while he lived in luxury, believing his wife's lies. A cold rage began to bubble within him, mixed with the searing pain of betrayal. But the rage was secondary to the need to find Clara. The steps seemed endless. Finally, the packed earth floor replaced the damp stone. The basement stretched into a narrow corridor, with several dark, heavy wooden doors, all closed. The phone's light danced across the walls, revealing what appeared to be makeshift cells, each with a small slit at the top. The air was unbreathable, heavy with despair. Carlos felt a chill that came not just from the cold of the environment, but from the terror of imagining his daughter there. Pipo flew from the step and landed on Carlos's shoulder again, pecking his neck and pointing with his head to the third door on the right. "Bad mommy, Clara, here," he chirped, this time with a conviction that made Carlos tremble. Carlos approached the indicated door, his heart in his throat. The wood was old and rough, with a small, rusty, barred window that allowed a partial view of the interior. He leaned in, his face pressed against the bars, and tried to peer inside. The darkness was almost total, but his eyes adjusted. In the farthest corner, huddled on a thin mattress on the floor, was a tiny figure. Clara. It was her. Her blonde hair, once bright and full of life, was matted and dull. Her clothes, dirty and worn, hung loosely on her thin body. She was hugging her knees, rocking gently, an almost inaudible sound of a whimper escaping her lips. Carlos felt the world spin. His little Clara, so fragile, so helpless was there, exactly as Pipo had said. A wave of love and despair swept over him. He pounded on the door with the palm of his hand, a hollow, desperate sound. "Clara! Daughter, it's me, Daddy!" His voice was choked, barely recognizable. The figure on the mattress trembled, and slowly her head lifted. Clara's large blue eyes, once full of sparkle, were now dull and frightened. But there was a flicker of recognition. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice weak, almost a breath. Carlos felt warm tears stream down his face. He reached out through the bars, trying to touch her, but the distance was too great. "Yes, my love, it's me. Daddy came to get you. I'm going to get you out of here." Pipo, on Carlos's shoulder, let out a soft chirp, as if confirming his words. Clara, with visible effort, tried to stand, her small limbs trembling. The sight of her so weak broke Carlos's heart into 1,000 pieces. The promise of justice for Sofia and Clara's liberation solidified in his soul. He would not fail her again. He stepped back, his mind working furiously. The door was locked from the outside with a heavy, rusty padlock. There were no keys in sight. He needed something to break it open, and fast. Every second Clara spent in that hell was another second of her stolen childhood. The determination in his eyes was fierce, an inextinguishable fire. He looked at Pipo, who seemed to understand the urgency, and then, at the door, his expression hardened. He would bring his daughter home. Carlos turned abruptly, the phone's light trembling in his hand. The basement was a labyrinth of shadows, with piles of dusty boxes and old tools scattered in the corners. His eyes desperately swept the surroundings, searching for anything that could serve his purpose. A crowbar, a hammer, anything that could break that cursed padlock holding his daughter captive. Pipo flew from Carlos's shoulder and landed on a pile of old wood, watching him with unusual seriousness. "Clara, trapped," he whispered, as a constant reminder of the urgency. With each passing second, the panic grew. Carlos imagined Clara, alone and frightened, on the other side of that door. The smell of mold and despair seemed to suffocate him. He stumbled over a box, almost falling, but regained his balance, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Finally, his eyes landed on a makeshift workbench covered in rust and dirt. There, among some old cans, was a robust iron bar, heavy and with a slightly curved tip. It wasn't a crowbar, but perhaps it would be enough. With the iron bar in hand, Carlos felt a new surge of strength. He returned to Clara's door, his heart pounding erratically. "Hold on, my love! Daddy's here!" he shouted. his voice hoarse with emotion. Clara, from the other side, let out a small whimper, a sound that broke Carlos's heart into 1,000 pieces and spurred him to act. He inserted the tip of the iron bar between the padlock and the door's hasp, applying all his strength. The metal groaned but didn't yield. He tried again with more vigor, the muscles in his arms trembling. A cold sweat trickled down his forehead. Pipo, who had returned to Carlos's shoulder, pecked his ear as if encouraging him. "Harder, bad mommy," he chirped, and Carlos felt renewed anger, channeling it into the task. With a cry of frustration and determination, he pulled the bar with all his might. A loud metallic snap echoed through the basement. The padlock finally gave way, breaking into 2 pieces that fell to the floor with a dull thud. The door creaked open. Carlos threw the iron bar aside and rushed inside, kneeling beside Clara. She was huddled, her eyes wide with fear. But when she saw her father's face, a small sound of relief escaped her lips. "Daddy," she whispered, extending her thin arms. Carlos hugged her with all the strength he had, tears streaming freely down his face. Clara's body was so small, so fragile in his arms, and he felt the pain of all the lost time, of all the suffering she had endured. "My Clara, my love, Daddy's here. You're safe now," he murmured, kissing her matted hair and smelling the mold and abandonment that permeated her clothes. Pipo flew and landed on Clara's head, rubbing his small head against the girl's hair, as if also offering comfort. Clara, despite the shock, managed a weak smile upon seeing her parrot friend. Carlos held her tightly, feeling the warmth of her small body against his. Guilt still gnawed at him, but the joy of holding her in his arms was overwhelming. He lifted her carefully, shielding her against his chest. "Let's go home, my angel. Let's get out of here," he promised, his voice choked, but full of a new and fierce determination. He needed to get her out of that place, take her to the light, to warmth, to safety. The journey to recovery would be long, but with Clara in his arms, Carlos knew they would face anything together. Justice for Sofia would come, but now the most important thing was his daughter's love and healing. Carlos ascended the dark staircase steps with Clara nestled in his arms, his heart beating a melody of relief and dread. Each step was an effort, not due to the physical burden, but to the weight of the truth he carried. Clara was fragile, her tiny body trembling slightly against his, but her small arms were firmly clasped around her father's neck, a sign of life and trust that warmed Carlos to his soul. Pipo flew ahead, landing on Carlos's shoulder as soon as they reached the top of the stairs. The parrot looked at the secret door, then at Carlos, and let out a soft chirp, almost a sigh of relief. The light filtering through the crack in the library door was a balm for Carlos's eyes, accustomed to the gloom of the basement, but for Clara, it was a shock. She pressed her face against her father's chest, letting out a small whimper. "It's okay, my love. It's just the light," Carlos whispered, stroking her matted hair. He pushed the door with his shoulder, and it opened with a familiar creak, revealing the opulence of the library, now tinged with a mocking golden morning light. The contrast between the luxury of that environment and the damp darkness from which they came was brutal. Carlos felt a wave of nausea. How could Sofia, the woman he loved, have created such a hell so close to paradise? The rage, previously cold, now burned with overwhelming intensity. He needed to get out of there. He needed fresh air, safety for his daughter. With Clara in his arms, Carlos began to move towards the library exit, every muscle tense, every sense on alert. He imagined what he would do next. Call the police, a doctor, whoever could help Clara recover and Sofia pay for her crimes. The mansion, once his refuge, now seemed a labyrinth of traps. He was almost reaching the main library door when a voice, cold and calculating, cut through the silence, making him stop abruptly. Well, what do we have here?" said Sophia, emerging from behind a tall bookshelf, a frosty smile on her lips. She was impeccably dressed, as if she had just stepped out of a photo shoot, but her eyes, once so welcoming, now gleamed with a malice Carlos had never seen. Clara trembled in Carlos's arms, hiding her face even deeper. Pipo, on Carlos's shoulder, let out a shrill cry, "Bad mommy! Bad mommy!" The sound echoed in the library, an accusatory testimony that made Sophia's smile falter for an instant. "So you found out, Carlos?" Sophia continued, her voice maintaining a tone of false calm, as if discussing a mere marital disagreement. "What a pity. I had so many plans for us, for our life." Without interruptions, she looked at Clara with veiled contempt, a look that made Carlos's blood run cold. She was always a nuisance, wasn't she? So fragile, so demanding. Carlos felt a tremor run through his body, not from fear, but from a controlled fury. He pressed Clara against him, shielding her from Sophia's venomous gaze. "You are a monster, Sophia," he managed to say, his voice hoarse with emotion. "How could you do this to your own daughter, to our daughter?" Sophia laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "My daughter, Carlos, please. She was always yours. A constant reminder that I would never be the only one in your life. And you, so naive, believing every word I said about the boarding school, about her illness." She took a step forward, her eyes fixed on Carlos, a defiant expression on her face. "But don't think this ends here, my dear. You won't just walk out with her and destroy everything I've built." Carlos's heart tightened. Sophia's coldness and cruelty were even more shocking up close. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a new and dangerous battle. He knew he needed to be more cunning than ever. Clara's safety depended on it. He looked at Pipo, who watched him with surprising intelligence, and then at Sophia, his determination unwavering. He wouldn't allow her to hurt Clara again. Carlos pressed Clara even tighter against his chest, feeling her tiny body tremble in his arms, an echo of his own anguish. Sophia's voice, once a seductive melody that had enchanted him for years, now sounded like a chilling poison, piercing the library's silence. "You won't just walk out with her and destroy everything I've built," she repeated, taking another step forward, her eyes fixed on him with a disturbing intensity that promised retaliation. It was a veiled threat, but Carlos felt it with the force of a physical blow, a warning that Sophia wouldn't hesitate to use any means to maintain her control and her facade. The library, with its imposing books and the ancient scent of knowledge, now seemed a stage for a cruel drama, where truth clashed against the purest ambition. "You built nothing good, Sophia," Carlos replied, his voice low, but laden with a contained fury he could barely control. You destroyed the trust I placed in you, the love I felt, and worst of all, the innocence and childhood of a helpless child." He looked at Clara, who still kept her face hidden in his shoulder, but whose small hands clutched his shirt with desperate strength, a silent plea for protection. Pipo, on Carlos's shoulder, flapped his wings, as if agreeing with every word spoken. "Bad mommy! Basement!" he chirped, reinforcing the accusation with a chilling clarity that made Sophia's lips tighten. Sophia laughed again, a dry, humorless sound that didn't reach her eyes, which remained cold and calculating. "Naive, Carlos. Always have been. Do you think the world works with fairy tales? I built a life of power and influence, of social recognition, and you were the centerpiece for that." Sophia made a dismissive gesture towards Clara, a movement that made Carlos's stomach churn, "was an inconvenience, a stain on the perfect image I created for us, for our ideal family." Carlos felt his blood boil. Sophia's coldness, the complete absence of remorse in her words and gaze, was shocking, a belated revelation of her true nature. He realized he could no longer argue with her. There was no logic, only a sick ambition and an inflated ego. He needed to act, and fast. His priority was Clara, her safety and well-being. He began to retreat slowly, his eyes fixed on Sophia, searching for an escape route, any path that would take them out of that nightmare. "Don't think you can just leave, Carlos," Sophia said, perceiving his intention with an alarming swiftness. She moved to block the main library door, her arms elegantly crossed, forming a graceful but relentless barrier. "Do you think you can leave me and take everything? My reputation, which I guarded so carefully? Your fortune, which I helped build with my contacts and intelligence? Don't be ridiculous." Her voice was a dangerous whisper, full of veiled threats. Carlos stopped, his heart pounding in his chest. The door was blocked. He looked around, desperately searching for another exit. There was a large window on the side of the library, but it was high, and he presumed locked. Despair began to tighten his chest like a vice, but he refused to give in. Clara deserved to be free, deserved the sunlight and unconditional love. "You won't stop us, Sophia," Carlos stated, his voice now firmer, laden with a new and fierce resolve. He knew he needed to be smarter, faster. He couldn't confront her physically, not with Clara in his arms, so fragile and frightened. He needed a distraction, an opening, a miracle. Pipo, as if sensing the tension growing in the air, flew from Carlos's shoulder and landed on Sophia's head, pecking her hair with force and determination. "Bad mommy! Bad mommy!" he shrieked, his small claws clinging to the woman's perfectly styled strands. Sophia let out a cry of surprise and rage, raising her hands to her head to swat away the bothersome bird, her elegant image undone for an instant. It was Carlos's chance. While Sophia was distracted, he ran to the window, but not to open it. Instead, he headed for a small service door he knew led to the back kitchen. It was a less obvious exit, and perhaps Sophia wouldn't expect it. He pushed the doorknob, but it was locked, a final obstacle. "Pipo, the key! Where's the key?" Carlos whispered, desperate, his eyes sweeping the room. Pipo flew to a small corner table where a crystal flower vase rested. The parrot pecked at the vase insistently, and Carlos noticed something shining underneath. It was a small metal keychain with a single old rusty key. Sophia, still irritated by Pipo, looked at Carlos with fury in her eyes, her face contorted. "You're not going anywhere!" she shrieked, running towards him, her footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. Carlos grabbed the key, his hands trembling slightly, and inserted it into the service door's lock. With a soft click, which sounded like the melody of freedom, the door opened. He didn't look back. With Clara firmly in his arms, he stepped through the door, Pipo flying right behind, leaving behind the library, Sophia, and the nightmare she had created. The fresh air of the kitchen, though still inside the mansion, felt like a breath of freedom, a whisper of hope. He was one step closer to getting Clara to safety, one step closer to justice. The fresh air of the kitchen, though still inside the mansion, felt like a breath of freedom, a whisper of hope. Carlos didn't hesitate. The modern kitchen was a temporary oasis, but the danger of Sophia reappearing was imminent. He needed to get out of the mansion as quickly as possible. His eyes swept the room, searching for the service door that led to the back of the property, away from the main entrance. Clara, still clinging to him, let out a faint sigh, her tiny body relaxing slightly, but the tension was still palpable in her small shoulders. Pipo, on Carlos's shoulder, cooed softly. Carlos moved quickly, his footsteps echoing on the cold floor. The service door was unlocked, and he opened it carefully, peering outside. The morning sun bathed the back garden, revealing colorful flower beds and a small vegetable patch. It was a stark contrast to the darkness and despair of the basement, and the sight of the blue sky brought a wave of relief to Carlos. He stepped out, closing the door silently behind him. With Clara in his arms, he hurried across the dewy grass, ignoring the stone path. He needed to reach the car, parked in the side garage, a place Sophia rarely frequented. Every second was precious. Carlos's mind raced, planning the next steps. First, Clara's safety, then Sophia's denunciation. He felt the weight of responsibility, but also a renewed strength, driven by his unconditional love for his daughter. Clara lifted her head from Carlos's shoulder. Her large blue eyes, previously dull, now seemed to absorb the sunlight with childlike curiosity. She pointed a trembling little finger at a butterfly fluttering near a rose bush. "Butterfly," she whispered, her voice still weak, but with a touch of wonder that filled Carlos's heart with hope. It was a sign, however small, that the girl was still there, her pure and resilient essence. "Yes, my love, a beautiful butterfly," Carlos replied, a gentle but hurried smile on his lips. He held her tighter, silently promising that he would do everything for her to see the beauty of the world without fear again. Pipo, as if sensing Clara's change in mood, flew ahead, landing on a branch and watching them, his small eyes bright. Upon reaching the garage, Carlos unlocked the car door. He placed Clara in the back seat with the utmost care, making sure she was comfortable and safe. "Stay here for a minute, my angel. Daddy will be right back," he said, closing the door and rushing to the driver's side. He took out his cell phone, which he had kept in his pocket, and dialed the number of his trusted lawyer, Dr. Almeida. Almeida's sleepy voice answered. "Carlos, is something wrong? It's very early." "Almeida, it's me. I need your help. It's urgent." "Sophia?" "She kept Clara trapped in the basement. I rescued her." Carlos's voice was choked but firm. There was a shocked silence. "What? Carlos, that's unbelievable. Where are you? And Clara, how is she?" "We're at my mansion, in the garage. Clara is very weak, but she's with me. I need you here, and I need you to call the police, and a trusted doctor. No one can know about this yet, Almeida. It needs to be discreet." The urgency in Carlos's voice conveyed the gravity of the situation. "I'm on my way, Carlos. I'll be there in 15 minutes, and I'll contact the authorities and a private doctor immediately. No one will touch Clara without your permission. Stay calm. You did the right thing." Carlos hung up, feeling an enormous weight lifted from his shoulders. He looked at Clara in the back seat, who watched him with a worrying stillness. Pipo flew into the car, landing on Clara's shoulder and rubbing his head against her, a gesture of affection that made the girl smile weakly. Carlos knew the battle wasn't over yet, but the first and most important part was done. Clara was safe. He sat in the driver's seat but didn't start the car. He needed to wait for Almeida. The mansion, once a symbol of his successful life, was now a stage of secrets and betrayals. He looked in the rearview mirror at Clara's pale face and at the parrot comforting her. True wealth wasn't in material possessions, but in the purity of that love he had almost lost. Justice would come, and with it, the chance to rebuild a future of truth and affection for his daughter. Carlos remained in the car, engine off. The silence of the garage was broken by his heartbeat and Clara's soft breathing. He turned, watching his daughter huddled, her eyes fixed on Pipo, who affectionately pecked her tiny hand. Tears streamed down his face. The sight of Clara, so small and vulnerable, awakened in him love, guilt, and rage against Sophia. How could he have been so blind to his daughter's suffering? He touched the girl's hair. Clara trembled but didn't pull away, warming Carlos's heart. The minutes dragged on, an eternity under uncertainty. Carlos's anxiety grew, but he forced himself to remain calm for Clara. Pipo, sensing the tension, flew to Carlos's shoulder, rubbing his head against his cheek. "Good, Daddy. Clara's safe," the parrot whispered, and Carlos felt a lump in his throat. Finally, the sound of tires approached. A dark car pulled up. Dr. Almeida, serious, stepped out quickly, followed by Dr. Ricardo and 2 police officers. Almeida rushed to the car, his eyes wide upon seeing Clara. "Carlos, my God." he murmured. "Is she all right?" Carlos nodded. "Alive, Almeida, but very weak and scared." Dr. Ricardo approached. "Excuse me, Carlos. May I examine her?" Carlos opened the back door. Clara flinched, but Pipo on her shoulder chirped softly. Dr. Ricardo knelt, speaking in a calm voice. "Hello, little one. I'm your daddy's friend. I just want to see if you're okay." Clara hesitated, extended her hand, allowing the doctor to check her pulse. While Dr. Ricardo examined Clara, the police officers moved discreetly towards the mansion, guided by Almeida. Carlos watched, feeling satisfaction, imagining Sofia facing the consequences. The priority was his daughter's safety and recovery. "She's dehydrated and malnourished, Carlos," Dr. Ricardo said. "We need to take her to a safe place with care and affection. A hospital would be too shocking. I suggest a specialized private clinic." Carlos agreed. "Whatever it takes, Dr. Ricardo, the best for her." He picked Clara up in his arms, feeling the light weight of her body. But with new hope, the girl nestled into his chest. Pipo flew to Carlos's shoulder like a loyal guardian. "We're going to a place where no one can hurt you anymore, my love," Carlos whispered, kissing Clara's forehead. "A place full of light and love." Almeida returned, his expression serious, but with a gleam of determination. "Sofia is being interrogated. She denies everything. But the evidence is overwhelming. The police found the basement. Pipo is quite a witness," he added. "We're taking her to a clinic, I know, Carlos. It's discreet and offers the best care and psychological support for Clara." Carlos nodded, feeling relief. Justice was beginning to be served. The future, though uncertain, promised the light of truth, unconditional love, and a new life for father and daughter. Carlos followed Dr. Ricardo and Almeida in a discreet car. Clara was nestled in his arms in the back seat, light and fragile sleep finally reaching her, lulled by the gentle movement. Pipo, snuggled in Clara's lap, offered his warmth and presence. Carlos watched the landscape, but his mind replayed the last few days. Pipo's words, the darkness of the basement, Sofia. Relief and gratitude flooded him, mixed with pain for his daughter's stolen childhood. He stroked Clara's fine hair, feeling her fragility, but also her resilience. The private clinic was a refuge of peace, nestled in a lush garden. The pastel-colored walls and the soft scent of lavender created a welcoming atmosphere, very different from the mansion. A nurse with a gentle smile greeted them, her eyes conveying warmth and understanding. She guided Carlos and Clara to a spacious, bright room with a garden view, where the afternoon sun filtered gently. "Here she will have all the care and affection she needs, Carlos," said Dr. Ricardo, his voice soft, as the nurse delicately helped Carlos place Clara on a soft bed. "We'll start with proper hydration and nutrition. The most important thing now is her comfort and emotional security." Clara opened her eyes briefly, blinking at the light, but didn't cry. Her eyes met Carlos's, and a small, almost imperceptible smile appeared on her pale lips. It was a smile worth more than all fortunes. He held her tiny hand, feeling the cold skin, but life pulsing there. "Thank you, Dr. Ricardo," Carlos replied, his voice choked. "Thank you all." Almeida, who had remained silent, placed a hand on Carlos's shoulder. "You did the right thing, Carlos. Now, we'll make sure Sofia pays for every one of her actions. The process will be long, but we have irrefutable evidence and important witnesses, like our friend Pipo." He looked at the parrot, perched on the headboard, watching Clara. Carlos nodded. Justice for Sofia was necessary, but his focus was entirely on Clara. He sat in the armchair beside the bed, watching the nurse begin the procedures with delicacy. She spoke to Clara in a sweet tone, explaining each step. Pipo, sensing the quietness, flew to the nurse's shoulder, observing her with curiosity before returning to his guardian post. Color began to return to Clara's cheeks, and a restorative sleep enveloped her. Carlos remained there, his hand in hers, feeling the connection strengthen with each heartbeat. He knew that recovery would be a journey, but he was ready for every step. The mansion, with its bitter memories, would be left behind. A new home, full of laughter and light, would be built. True wealth, he realized, wasn't in possessions, but in presence, in touch, in the unconditional love that overflowed in his heart. That was the first day of a new life, a rebirth for both, where truth had prevailed and love finally could flourish. Carlos remained by Clara's side, observing each soft breath, each small movement. The nurse, with her gentleness, had finished the initial care, and now the girl slept deeply, a sleep that seemed more peaceful than any Carlos had seen her have. Pipo, a faithful squire, nestled in Clara's lap, his small, warm body offering silent comfort. Carlos felt a mix of gratitude and deep pain for his daughter's stolen innocence. He stroked Clara's fine hair, imagining the months, perhaps years, of solitude and fear she had endured. Guilt tightened his chest, but he transformed it into a silent promise. He would never leave her alone again. The next day, Clara woke up, her blue eyes still a little dull, but with a glimmer of recognition upon seeing Carlos. She didn't speak much, but accepted the light soup the nurse offered, and even smiled weakly when Pipo gently pecked her little nose. Every small gesture was a victory, a sign that life was returning to those previously empty eyes. Dr. Ricardo explained that recovery would be gradual, a process of healing not only physical, but also emotional. Carlos was ready for every step, every challenge. The clinic offered playful therapies, and he imagined Clara soon drawing and playing, rediscovering the joy of being a child. While Clara rested, Almeida arrived, his expression serious, but with an air of determination. He sat beside Carlos, ensuring they were alone. "Carlos, Sophia's situation is untenable," he began, his voice low. "She continues to deny everything, trying to manipulate, but the evidence is overwhelming. The police found the basement exactly as you described, with Clara's toys, blankets, the few foods. It's a scenario of neglect and unlawful imprisonment that shocked everyone." Carlos felt a chill, but also a bitter satisfaction. The truth, finally, was coming to light. "And Pipo?" Carlos asked, looking at the parrot, who was on Clara's shoulder in a light sleep. "He's a crucial witness, Carlos. His denunciations were recorded, and although a parrot cannot formally testify, his behavior and the phrases he incessantly repeated were fundamental to the investigation and the credibility of your story. The prosecution is confident. Sophia will be charged with kidnapping and child abuse, in addition to other charges related to fraud and manipulation of her fortune." Almeida paused, observing Carlos's reaction. "She's trying to plead insanity, but there's no basis for it. It's just another one of her desperate tactics." Carlos closed his eyes for an instant, the image of Sophia, once so seductive, now distorted by cruelty. "I want her to pay for every moment of pain she caused Clara, Almeida, no matter how long it takes." His voice was firm, laden with an unwavering resolve. He looked at Clara, who now stirred slightly in bed, and a small smile appeared on her lips. "The priority is her recovery. May she know that the world is a good place, full of love." Almeida nodded, understanding the depth of Carlos's feelings. "Justice will be served, Carlos, and you, with your courage, rescued Clara from a nightmare. That's what matters. The legal process may be painful, but it will be a path to healing for both of you." Carlos felt a weight lifted from his shoulders. The legal battle would be the climax of his struggle, the guarantee that Sophia could no longer harm anyone. He knew the road ahead would still be long, but with Clara in his arms, With Pipo as his faithful companion and with truth as his guide, he was ready to face anything. Light was returning to their lives, and love, finally, would flourish without shadows. Carlos watched Clara play with a small teddy bear the nurse had brought. Her movements were still slow, but there was a lightness in her gestures that hadn't existed before. A month had passed since they arrived at the clinic, and each day brought a new color to the girl's pale face. She ate with more appetite, slept without the nightmares that tormented her in the first nights, and most importantly, began to speak. Her first words, besides Daddy and Pipo, were about the clinic's garden, about the flowers and birds she observed from the window. Carlos felt his heart overflow with a joy he thought he had lost forever. He spent every free moment by her side, reading stories, drawing with her, or simply holding her tiny hand as she slept. The guilt that gnawed at him lessened with each of Clara's smiles, replaced by an unwavering determination to be the father she always deserved. Pipo, the faithful companion, was a constant presence. He flew around the room, landed on Clara's head, gently pecked her fingers, and repeated affectionate phrases like "Clara happy" or "Daddy loves." The parrot was more than a pet. He was a family member, a guardian, and the link that had unveiled the truth. Clara laughed at Pipo's antics, and these laughs, once so rare, were now Carlos's favorite melody. One morning, while Clara was coloring a drawing of butterflies, Almeida arrived, his expression lighter than in previous visits. He sat beside Carlos, who was on the floor, helping Clara choose colors. "Carlos, I have news," he said, his voice calm, but with a tone of finality. "Sophia's trial has concluded. The evidence was irrefutable. The testimony of the mansion's staff, Pipo's recordings, the discovery of the basement with all of Clara's belongings, everything pointed to the truth." Carlos stopped coloring, the blue pencil in his hand. He looked at Almeida, his heart pounding, but without the desperation of before. There was a serenity in his gaze, an acceptance of what was to come. "And what was the verdict?" he asked, his voice low so as not to disturb Clara, who was completely absorbed in her drawing. "Sophia was found guilty of kidnapping and child abuse. She was sentenced to a considerable prison term," Almeida explained, his voice firm. "Furthermore, the court ruled that she will not have access to her fortune or any part of it. All assets and accounts have been frozen and will be administered for Clara's benefit. Justice has been served, Carlos. She will pay for her actions." A deep sigh of relief escaped Carlos's lips. There was no triumph on his face, only a stillness, a peace he hadn't felt in a long time. The image of Sophia, once a shadow in his mind, now seemed to diminish, losing its power. He looked at Clara, who lifted her blue eyes, an innocent smile on her lips, showing him the drawing of a colorful butterfly. "Look, Daddy, it's beautiful," she exclaimed, holding out the paper. Carlos took the drawing, his eyes moist. "It's the most beautiful I've ever seen, my love," he replied, hugging her tenderly. That hug was the true wealth, the most significant victory. "Now, Carlos, it's time to think about the future," Almeida continued, observing the scene with a discreet smile. "The mansion, it's empty. Do you want to go back there?" Carlos shook his head. "No, Almeida, that house is full of bitter memories. I want a new beginning for Clara and me. A place where we can build new memories, full of light and joy." He had already thought about it. A simpler place, perhaps a house with a large garden where Clara could run freely and Pipo could fly. "That's an excellent idea," Almeida agreed. "I'll take care of everything. You and Clara deserve a fresh start." Carlos looked at his daughter, who was now laughing as Pipo pecked the tip of her pencil. The journey had been arduous, but truth had prevailed. Unconditional love, the strength of family, and a father's courage had rescued a life. The future, once murky and uncertain, now opened up, bright and full of promises. Together, they would build a new chapter where each day would be a celebration of freedom, affection, and true happiness. Carlos and Clara, hand in hand, crossed the threshold of their new home. It wasn't a grand mansion, but a cozy home with light walls and wide windows that invited the sunlight in. A vast garden stretched out in the back, filled with fruit trees and a flower bed that Clara had already promised to tend. Pipo flew ahead, exploring every room with curiosity and contagious enthusiasm before landing on Clara's shoulder, chirping happily. It was the beginning of everything, a new dawn they so deserved. The following months were a balm for their wounded souls. Clara blossomed like a flower watered after a long drought. Her blue eyes, once filled with fear and sadness, now shone with the vivacity and curiosity of a happy child. She ran through the garden, her crystalline laughter echoing among the trees, played hide-and-seek with Carlos, and talked incessantly with Pipo, who seemed to understand her every word, responding with chirps and head bobs. Carlos watched her, his heart overflowing with a pure and indescribable joy. He had sold the old mansion, ridding himself of all bitter memories and the weight of a painful past. That chapter was finally closed. He dedicated his time to Clara, working from home whenever possible, or taking her for outings to the park, the museum, or simply for ice cream, celebrating every small discovery. Every moment was precious, an opportunity to rebuild lost time and to show her the beauty and goodness of the world, which had previously been denied to her. Clara, in turn, taught Carlos the simplicity of happiness, the importance of a tight hug, of a story told before bedtime, and of the warmth of the unconditional love that united them. Pipo continued to be the family's loyal guardian, a constant reminder of the truth he had revealed with such courage. His phrases, once sinister and full of warning, were now full of affection and joy. "Clara happy, Daddy loves," he repeated frequently, and Carlos felt a wave of emotion each time, a lump in his throat of gratitude. The parrot was living proof that justice, however convoluted, would always find a way, and that the voice of innocence would never be silenced. Almeida visited them occasionally, always with a satisfied and proud smile upon seeing Clara's radiant transformation and the genuine peace on Carlos's face. He confirmed that Sofia remained in prison, her appeal denied, without any chance of success. Society, informed of the shocking details of the case, had vehemently and unanimously condemned her actions. Carlos no longer felt anger, only a deep gratitude for having rescued his daughter in time and for having the opportunity to give her a full life filled with love. On a sunny afternoon, while Clara and Pipo planted sunflower seeds in the garden, Carlos sat on a rustic wooden bench, watching them with a tender smile. The sun warmed his face, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees, carrying the scent of flowers. He thought of his past life, of the empty luxury and the blindness that had prevented him from seeing his daughter's silent suffering. Now, he had everything that truly mattered: Clara's unconditional love, Pipo's unwavering loyalty, and the peace of mind that money could never buy. Clara approached, bringing a freshly picked flower, a vibrant yellow. "For you, Daddy," she said, her blue eyes shining with sincere joy. Carlos took the flower, feeling the softness of the petals against his skin. "It's beautiful, my love," he replied, pulling her into a tight, lingering hug. Pipo landed on Carlos's shoulder, and the small family remained there, under the golden sun, together. A perfect portrait of love and overcoming adversity. True wealth, Carlos clearly understood, wasn't in fortunes or social status, but in the bonds that unite us, in the courage to seek truth, and in the capacity to love and forgive. He had found his redemption, and with it, the most precious of jewels, his daughter's happiness. That was his new beginning, a testament that Even in the greatest adversities, love and hope always find a way to flourish. And so, under the blue sky and Pipo's watchful eye, Carlos and Clara built a future where each day was a promise fulfilled, a hymn to life, to freedom, and to the unconditional love that united them forever. Carlos watched Clara as she watered the small sunflower seedlings they had planted together. The morning sun bathed the garden in a golden hue, and the girl's crystalline laughter was the sweetest melody he had ever heard. Pipo, perched on Clara's shoulder, pecked at the leaves with curiosity, murmuring, "Clara, beautiful, Daddy loves." That was the new rhythm of their lives, dictated by love, light, and rediscovered simplicity. Each day was a celebration of freedom and connection. The grand mansion, with its cold corridors and dark secrets, was now a distant memory. Carlos had found a greater purpose than the accumulation of wealth. His technological empire prospered, but it was now managed with a new perspective, prioritizing time with his daughter, walks, bedtime stories. He felt richer than ever, not because of his accounts, but because of the richness of shared moments, exchanged smiles, of a love that blossomed each day, filling every corner of their new home. Clara, with her golden hair and blue eyes full of life, was living proof of human resilience. The sessions with the therapist had helped, but the true remedy was her father's unconditional love and Pipo's loyal companionship. She was learning to read at the small neighborhood school, and each new word deciphered was a victory celebrated with tight hugs and proud glances. Fear had given way to curiosity, sadness to joy, and each day she seemed stronger and more confident. One afternoon, as Carlos helped Clara assemble a puzzle at the living room table, Pipo flew to the window, observing the sky. "Blue sky, bright future," he chirped, and Carlos smiled, feeling the truth in those words. Almeida, friend and confidant, visited them regularly, bringing news about the foundation Carlos had created in Clara's name, dedicated to helping vulnerable children. It was a way to transform the pain of the past into hope, a legacy of compassion and justice that resonated deeply. Carlos looked at Clara, who now called him to show him a fitted piece, her eyes shining with the satisfaction of discovery. He knelt, kissing her forehead with tenderness. "You are my greatest work, my love," he whispered, and she smiled, a genuine smile that lit up the entire room. Pipo flew to Carlos's shoulder, nestling in, a silent and loving guardian. That was his universe, small, but complete and overflowing with affection. Life continued to be a journey, with challenges and joys. Carlos and Clara were ready to face it together, hand in hand, hearts intertwined. They had learned that true strength lay not in the absence of scars, but in the courage to heal them and the capacity to love without reservations. Each morning, upon waking and seeing the sun stream through the windows, Carlos felt immense gratitude for every small miracle. That home, built on the foundations of truth and love, was a sanctuary of peace and happiness. There, amidst children's laughter, parrot chirps and hugs, they wrote day after day the most beautiful chapter of their lives, a new beginning and a happiness that multiplied with each passing moment.